In this tutorial, we're going to learn the basics of using materials in UDK. Alright, so up to this point you should have your static meshes all set up on the exterior of your building. Okay, so you should have your windows and some trim objects and things like that along your building here. Now at this point what we want to do is we want to start adding in materials onto our BSP objects here. So in order to start adding materials to your surfaces, you need to go to your content browser and then you need to search for materials. Now you can use the materials that already come with the UDK editor. Okay, so if you just go to your content folder, filter by materials, you can go ahead and start searching through some of those. Now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to type in bunker because there is a bunker material that I want to use for this specific lesson. Now remember, if you have assets in your content browser, you're going to see this little icon here, and this means that this is not fully loaded. So what you can do is you can right click on the package or just the content folder and fully load that. Okay, and that will load that into memory. Okay, now fully loading a package may take just a little bit of time because it's loading up any packages that are not previously loaded at this time. Okay, and you'll notice that that icon has disappeared. Now to add a material to a surface, you can simply left click and drag the selected material onto the surface, or you can select the material, you can right click on another surface and go to apply material. Okay, and that will do the same thing. Now we can also have a material selected in our content browser, and we can come around and we can hold down Alt and then left click on that surface, and that will apply that material as well. Now let's say that I'm going to start applying lots and lots of materials in my scene here. Let's go ahead and find a different material here as well. I'm going to type in wall, and I'm going to look for this HU walls flat wall, and I'm going to go ahead and select that and apply this on the inside of my scene. Now, if the material or the content browser gets in the way, I'm going to go ahead and just minimize that for just a moment. I'm going to apply that to this surface here. So I'm going to right click on this and add material. Okay, now I have multiple materials in my scene. So as I'm working with all of these different materials, I don't necessarily have to open up my content browser to access materials that are already in the scene. So for example, right now this material is selected in the content browser. But let's say that I forgot a wall along the outside. All I have to do to get this material back is simply hold down Alt and then right click on that surface, and it's going to copy that material. And then I can hold down Alt and left click on another surface, and that will apply that. Okay, so I can just hold down Alt and left click and that material all the way around. Okay, and I could apply that to my entire building on the outside. Okay, so with that applied, now what I can do is I can come onto the inside here, hold down Alt, right click, and then Alt left click on the surfaces on the inside of my building. So you'll want to go ahead and do that on the interior here, because that's going to be the material that I'm going to be using on the interior of here, including the window seals and the door frames themselves. So you can hold down Alt and apply those as well. Now what happens if I've applied these materials and they don't look quite the way that I want them to? For example, we have this tiled material where we have these struts going across the building here. I don't necessarily like that the size of them, and I don't necessarily like the placement of them either. So what I can do is I can double click on that surface and bring up my surface properties. Now notice it says one surface selected. I can come in with this properties open and I can hold down Control and I can select multiple surfaces and I can change their properties at the same time. So if I come in here and I Control left click on all of these surfaces, let's make sure that we have all the surfaces on the outside. So Control left click, and including this front. Okay, so I have all of those along the outside of my building. Now what I can do is I can adjust the scale of this texture by going to my tiling. Okay, so I want this to be a little bit larger, so I'm going to type in 0.5 on my U and then 0.5 on my V. So you can think of this as your U direction is left to right, and then my V direction is up and down. Okay. So with that set, you'll notice that I've applied those changes, but nothing has happened. Well, I have to actually hit apply for that to take effect. Now you'll see that that texture is a little bit larger on our building. So now what I can do is I can start to use my pan functionality to get the texture exactly where I want it on my surface. So in this case, I want this part of the texture to be right atop or right on top of my door frame here. So I'm going to adjust it in its V direction. That's going to be up and down. Now the U direction is going to be left and right, like I said. Okay, so let's come in here and let's start to adjust those values. Now we have 4 presets. We have a unit of 1, 4, 16, and 64. So I can actually click on these units and it will move the tile or the texture that many units down in the V direction. So if I hit 64, you'll notice that it moves quite a bit more. So let's go to 16 and we'll drop that down and we'll get pretty close, and then I'm going to start dropping this down by 4 and then by 1 to start getting that lined up. Now once I've got that lined up to where I want it, I can go ahead and close out of this and I don't have to worry about that. Now notice that I have done this to all the surfaces, and that's just to make sure that the textures line up properly all the way around this building. Now you can do individual surfaces if you want and get a different alignment on your textures. That's totally up to you. Now what happens if I have hit one of these buttons on accident? I could hit Control Z and go back if I wanted to, but I could also come in and apply a custom amount here, and I could type in -4 if I've gone too many. Okay, and that's going to make things a lot easier on us. So I know that we have several other pieces of functionality in here. We can set up its light map resolution if we want. We could rotate these textures around. We can flip them into UV space. All of that works pretty similarly to the tiling and the panning. We have some different settings here as well, but I think that's going to be a little bit out of the scope of this course. So let's go ahead and close this out. We've learned how to apply them to surfaces. We've learned how to adjust materials. We know how to select a material. Now, how do we create a material? Well, let's go ahead and open up our content browser. And we've actually minimized that, so here we go. So let's create a brand new material. Now, I can do this 2 different ways. I can right-click in my browser here, and I can say New Material, or I can come down here and say New Asset. Now, what's the difference? Well, when we right-click and do New Material, it's going to bring up our new dialog box here. Notice the factory setting. That's already set to Material. Now, if I close this and I say New Asset, you'll notice that this says Anim Set in our factory. Now, whenever you create a new asset, it doesn't necessarily know what you want to create, so you have to specify that particularly. So let's go to Material, and then we could say on our package where we want this to belong. We can choose a package that is in our list, or we can create a new one. So if I want to create a new one, I can say DT_intro, and we'll go ahead and just leave that the way it is. Actually, I'll say _mats. Okay. And then I'm going to give it a grouping. So I'm going to put this in a materials group just to keep things organized, and then we'll give it a name. So I'm going to say test material, and then we'll hit OK. Now it's going to create that package, and then it's also going to create that material and then bring up our material editor. Now there are a couple of sections that we want to talk about in the material editor itself. We have the menu bar, which is going to allow us to show and hide panels. We have our toolbar, which contains commands that are going to allow us to modify the interface and how materials and expressions are going to be previewed. So for example, we have these mesh previews that we can see our material on, okay, things like that. We have our preview panel where we can actually preview our material on an object. We have our graph, which is going to hold all of our expressions that will make up our material. We have our material expressions pane here that is going to hold all of our expressions that we can use to create a material. And then we have a material function library. Now the material functions They are kind of like actions in Photoshop, if you want to think of it that way. We can bring those in and they can perform specific actions that we have created. Now we're not going to be getting into those because those are a little more advanced. And then finally at the bottom we have our material properties, and this is where we can define certain aspects of our selected materials or expressions. So let's go ahead and learn how to create a material here. We've created the material itself. If I close this, you can see that the material has been created, but it's got this blue checker pattern on it. Okay, it doesn't have any textures applied to it. So let's double click on that material to bring up our material editor again. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to minimize this for just a moment, and I'm going to search for textures in my content browser. Now you can import your own textures if you want. We're not going to cover that process in this course, but you can look out for that pretty soon. I'm going to select just a 2D texture, so I'm just going to select this Dirt D. Let's select that, and you'll notice it's highlighted in yellow, and then I can bring up my material editor, and I can come in here and right click on my graph and choose Texture, New Texture Sample, and you'll notice that it applies that texture that I had selected in my content browser and applies it to this expression. Now if I don't have anything selected in my content browser, okay, let's deselect everything and let me close that, and I right click and go to Texture, Texture Sample. Notice that it's going to be blank, and I would have to come in and go to Texture and then apply a texture to that. So I'd have to go to my content browser, select it, and then use this Use Selected Object in Content Browser. All right, let's go ahead and select that. Notice it's highlighted in yellow, and then we can delete that. Now to move around in your graph, you'll want to hold down the left mouse button to pan. You can zoom in and out by using your mouse wheel, and then we can move objects around by selecting them, highlighted in yellow, and then hold down Control and left click and drag, and that will move that expression. Now to hook up this expression to our material, we're going to go to one of our outputs, which is going to be diffuse, red, green, blue, and alpha. I'm going to go to my diffuse channel or output, and I'm going to left click and hold on that. Notice it gives me a connection while I'm holding that left mouse button. I can apply this to any one of these inputs, but in this case I want to apply it to my diffuse, which is basically just going to give me a basic color on my object. Now we can see something in our preview, and I can hold down the left mouse button and orbit around that object. I can use my middle mouse button to pan, and then I can hold down my right mouse button to zoom in and out. And I can also, excuse me, you can't use your mouse wheel here. You can only use your right mouse button, excuse me. Okay, so now that we've previewed that, and we can see a preview of this, we can add in more textures if we wanted to. So if I wanted to add like a normal map or something like this, I would simply select the normal map that I want to use in my content browser, and then right click, Texture, New Sample Texture. Now there are lots and lots of expressions to go through, and we're not going to be covering those in this course, but you can be on the lookout for the Introduction to Materials course in UDK. Okay, so now that we've created a basic material here, let's go ahead and apply our changes, and that will save that material in that package that we've provided. And you can close this down, and you can go into your content browser, and it's going to be in that package. So you can see here New Packages, DT Intro to Mats, Materials Group, and then if we turn off textures, you'll see that we have our test material. Okay, now whenever you create any new packages, make sure that you save them. Notice the little asterisk here, okay, on the package and your object. So if you want to save this, just right click and save. Now in this case I don't necessarily want to save that material. Okay, so now that we've talked about how to apply materials, how to modify materials, and also how to create materials in just kind of a basic sense, now we're ready to move on to our next lesson, where we're going to start going in and set dressing the exterior of our level. So I'll see you then.